Thanks a lot for joining us, Richard. So, yeah, what time is it over there for you right now?
10 a.m., sunny Los Angeles, of course, we're like 8 hours apart now.
Brilliant. So, yeah, well, let's start from the very beginning then. So, how did you get started in mixing?
Well, I am a musician first. I'm a 35-year pianist. I wanted to be a jazz pianist, I wanted to be a rock star like every good teenager should be, should want to be. And, in the travels of that, it was pretty clear that it would be a better fit to be on the other side of the glass at one point. So I went to the SAE in Berlin while I was at the same time trying to get into their conservatories for music, and then kind of like pivoted. I was like, this is really working, and from there went to Berklee College of Music and finished my Bachelor of Music there, Music Production and Engineering. That's what it's called, MP&E. Shout out to Rob Jasko, Carl Beatty, the people that made me, literally. And I was able to turn that stint at Berklee into a life-changing decision of moving and staying from Germany to the United States. And then obviously, you're done. You go like, so what's the next step after graduating? And my choices were either New York or Los Angeles. And I went to New York. It's one of those things when you're very young and you make a important decision. You kind of go like, where should I go? And one of these things were like, once in your life to live in New York, that sounds like a really exciting proposition, So I took my bag and moved from Boston to New York.
So, was that more on the lifestyle of the place in New York, or was it, did you have some career options that you kind of wanted to pursue there?
Well, I mean, I knew I wanted to work in a studio, in one of the bigger studios. So at the time, that would have been Hit Factory, that would have been Right Track in New York, Unique, Quad. The place I settled into was called Sound on Sound. And I tell this to people all the time, like even though I graduated top of my class and I had every recommendation one could possibly want, when you come to a new city, it's not like they've been waiting for you. It's not like, hello, Richard, here's a job for you, sir. No, that's not how that works. So basically, Sound on Sound was not my first choice, but it was the first person who said, you know what, A, we think you're really great, and B, we need a person, a warm body, so to speak, to start as a runner, right? So that's how it all came together. Like over time, you realize whatever you think the best outcome is in your career is probably not what's going to happen. What's going to happen is something close to that while you're striving for it. So I started at Sound on Sound as a runner. I became an assistant very quickly, which was very lucky for me because some people have to run for years. And I think I became an assistant after 6 weeks, which was very lucky. It had something to do with a personal changeover, and hopefully it had something to do with I was pretty good at it. Yeah, and then from there, the biggest thing about a New York studio, and this was a big studio, four rooms, SSL, Neve, later Oxford, Sony Oxford rooms, but in the center of New York. This is literally like two blocks away from Times Square. So everything is basically jingles and Broadways and jazz music during the day. And at night, it would flip on a switch to hip hop and R&B. And actually, we were in the same building that the studio Daddy's house was, which was Puff Daddy then / Diddy's studio. So we got a lot of their work, like when they said, hey, we don't have enough rooms, can you work on this, et cetera, et cetera. So before you know, everything is 100-hour weeks, and with this really great change of like live instruments during the day and then hip hop R&B at night. It's a beautiful thing, and some soundtracks, of course.
And I'm guessing you would regularly do a day shift and then into a night shift and do them consecutively, would you? Or
oh yeah, there were no shifts basically. Somebody gets put on a session and then you stay there until it's done basically. So I kid you not, the longest session in a row was like 78 hours.
Wow.
But every week was at least 80 hours. The longest week I ever did was like 116 hours or something like that. This was great. I mean, of course we were paid not well. This was minimum wage, probably $5.50 or so, but you also had no time to spend it. So basically, it was a great time to basically live the rock and roll / hip hop lifestyle and get to learn from the greats and get to learn from many people doing many genres, which I think is super, super important for, especially when you're an engineer.
And I'm guessing back then as well, it was, before the digital audio boom kind of took over. So, seeing in that age how hip hop was made compared to today, what did you learn from that sort of process?
It's interesting that you point that out because so I'm not that old. Uh, no, I'm. This was early 2000s, and what actually happened was right at that year, 2000, 2001, 2002. Everything changed from recording to 2-inch tape, and sometimes DA-88s, Tascam machines, when the budget was not there for analog, to Pro Tools. But a Pro Tools session was normally, it's not like today where basically now we're used to recording in any kind of DAW, Ableton, Logic, Studio One, etc., etc., and Pro Tools still. But it was more like Pro Tools was the only option for digital, like serious digital recording. And the engineer who would run the session would actually normally not run this Pro Tools. They would probably have a Pro Tools operator at the time or somebody who's into computers, etc. And I was kind of in the middle of it because I was very, very good at Pro Tools very early on, which made me very valuable to a lot of sessions. But at the same time, I was also an engineer, and I was looking forward to mostly engineering. So one reason why I quit my job was basically there were constantly sessions coming in where Pro Tools operators try to become engineers, if I want to say it like that. And me as the assistant, who I'm there to learn, right? I'm really there to learn and improve my craft. All of a sudden, I start babysitting. This is a bad word, but babysitting
Yes.
computer jockeys who don't know how to engineer. And sure, there were exceptions. They were also really great people. I'm not saying that. But there was a lot of these sessions which made me go like, why am I here? I'm trying to become an engineer. Dealing with these people doesn't get me there, so I have to quit. And that's where I quit my job and became an engineer. And a Pro Tools based engineer that can also run all analog gear. It was a hybrid system kind of at that time. And at the time, like I said earlier, it was valuable to be that person.
And so, what was your kind of first big break in terms of working more directly with the artist rather than through an individual studio?
That's an interesting question because the reason we were at this studio, or the reason I landed there, was because very often artists would just book the studio and not bring engineers. And at the same time, studios don't really have engineers on staff. They have assistant engineers normally. Now, these engineers probably are capable to run any session, and they could probably engineer circles around many other people, especially because they knew the rooms inside out, right? But theoretically, they didn't have the credits yet, and they didn't have the opportunities yet. But a studio like that, what it really did was it was a magnet for music and music people. And when they didn't come prepared, like, hey, we didn't we didn't book an engineer, all of a sudden you had a gig. They're like, hey, you're gonna run this session? Yeah. Then the studio manager would tell the client, hey, our assistant's gonna run the session, but not for assistant rate. Then you get to charge an actual engineering rate. Or in that case, the studio would probably mark it up, and then I think I remember we got some kind of cut from it, and that was a beautiful situation. And so to answer your question, what happened was a bunch of sessions that I could have probably not pulled myself, like just by saying, hey, I'm really good at engineering, fell in my lap there by being prepared to get them. So that would be Outkast, that would be Jay-Z, that would be what comes in? Oh, Adam Schlesinger, who actually, if I might want to say that, he died exactly a year ago. But if you know who he is,
Fountains of Wayne, right?
Fountains of Wayne. We ended up doing Stacy's mom together and a bunch of his stuff at his studio, etc. So the whole studio was a catalyst of me meeting people, and so you ease into the role of engineer until you're basically cocky enough to say, that's what I do, and you should pay me accordingly, and I don't have time for this assistant thing anymore.
And how did you navigate the kind of interpersonal skills? You know, obviously being an assistant and, you know, you don't talk quite as often, and easing into that, the interpersonal skill side, and also being able to show enough personality to people enjoy having you around. How did you navigate that side as well?
I'm German, I sound funny. I mean, that's an immediate advantage. No, actually, that's a very good question, because the funny part is I was, working on the Jay-Z session and the Daddy's House sessions and the Terror Squad sessions and Loud Records for like Dead Press and stuff, like all very deep hip hop records. And there's this German dude who sounds a little funny, but he's good at engineering and is trying to hang. And it couldn't be more different in a way. But and with in some sessions that worked, and in some sessions that was just immediately a thing like, okay, I don't think I'm gonna see that person ever again because we're just not vibing. And that's the same in every room to this day. Like, if you're an engineer, your first answer to everything is yes, sir, and client gets what client needs, right? And the second is you need to be a good hang. And am I a good hang? Well, most of the time, not for everyone. I don't think anybody can say that for themselves, which is much easier when you're mixing, because I only have to be nice to you when it comes to presentation mode. No, I try. I try to be a person, be a mensch, be the person that you're trying to create an environment where people want to come back, but where they also, when they walk out, they're gonna go like, "Hey, that was kind of awesome and fun." That those will be the people who will come back to you. And at the beginning, that's very hard because you're supposed to be quiet and in the corner, etc. Especially an assistant, please. But you have to learn it from somebody, and hopefully you find enough people that will kind of show you the way. It's not your point to like hang with everybody like you are them. That is, actually Dave Pensado told me this. He's like, don't try to be them. You have to interface with the client, but stay being yourself, and that will make you probably stand out more than trying to blend in somehow and being part of a crew that you are not from the get-go. Yeah.
Brilliant. And so was there a moment for you when you kind of had a bit of a moment where you were like, wow, I finally feel comfortable or feel like a pro, was there a moment when you just kind of had that realization that, my God, I'm where, I dreamt of being a few years ago?
That's an interesting question. Yes and no. So yes, actually my very first day on the job, sorry, not my very first day, but like my very first session that I was thrown in on the job in New York was for DJ Muggs. If you know, he's from Cypress Hill. And I was a big hip hop fan growing up in the 90s, like Cypress Hill, Jazzmatazz, Guru, DJ Premier, this kind of stuff. So actually being in the room with somebody who I admired, that was the first time where I was like, oh, you did a thing. You changed continents and you went to school twice and you spent all these years. And I was just an assistant that day, that was not that deep, but it was definitely a moment where I was like, okay, that's special. And later it was another moment where I was sitting with Cassandra Wilson, who's a jazz singer, and we had wine and we talked about autotune, which is kind of odd to talk to her about that because she's a fantastic singer. She just wanted to know more about it because it was early in autotune's history. And I was like, here I am. Okay, this is actually why I do what I do. I wanted to be a pianist, really. I said that at the beginning. But I realized that I was pretty good, but I was not Herbie Hancock, nowhere close to that. So I realized that the music I wanted to make, I would never be invited to make that music with the people at that caliber because I was just not that good. That's fine. And the reason why I do engineering is because I felt at that time that if I, work hard, diligently and study, et cetera, and make my way, that I could actually make music at that level and be one of the cats on the engineering side. And that part came true. So I'm eternally thankful for that part because basically, I guess the last time I thought like, well, I don't know if I can do something like that. You can do something was when I started working with Prince, and I was like, I can hang with Prince for a year and do a good job / being asked to come back, etc. That is, at that point, you just go like, maybe I get a gig or I lose a gig or this mix turns out, this doesn't, or anything else. Doesn't matter. But the question is never, can I do the job? I'm convinced I can do the job for anyone after work with Prince.
I was going to say, because there are lots and lots of stories about his work ethic and kind of the demands that he puts on people working for or with him. And I guess this is a double-barrel question of A, did that hold true to your experiences? And B, what did you learn from those sort of experiences?
I mean, when it comes to him personally, to Prince, what I normally tell people, whatever you heard in any kinds of stories, I would say is probably true. I mean, I don't know what you heard, of course, but it was demanding. It was a wild ride. It had very, very crazy moments and, both ways, both positive and negative. And that's just the description of what we do as engineers, and on a musical level, he was unfortunately a genius, and I was a super fan too. I had like every album since I was like from the early 80s on, and the odd part was I also had every bootleg, which is something that he would probably not appreciate because he didn't like bootlegs at all. So I don't know, it's one of those things where you go like, this is what we've been training for. Can you hang? Can you get this guy what he needs? Because obviously he knows how to make. He doesn't know how to make every record, but he does know exactly how to make his records, right? So you had to learn, follow along, going like, okay, so this is the Linn drum that made When Doves Cry, and please hook that up the way I want it hooked up, and we run it to tape or we run it to Pro Tools, etc. And they were. I want to say, and I'm not cocky about this, but he learned things from me, and I learned things from him. And the reason I say that is because we worked a lot in Pro Tools, and he hadn't, or at least he made it sound like he hadn't. And there were moments where I'm like, wait, we're doing this and this and the other, and you have never heard of that? So that's odd, and the same thing for me, like, why are you doing it this way when it clearly could be done this other way? In some ways better, in some ways worse, So it was an exploration of both of our experiences. But in the end, I like coming back to what I said, client gets what client needs. So at the end, we are the service person. We are the person who's like, I got to figure out what makes, not so much what makes him tick, but what makes him get from A to B and make the record he wants to make. And he was thankful. I was thankful. And so it was a very, very impactful ride.
So if Prince is on the kind of bucket list of people to work with, who else is on that list that you maybe haven't worked with yet?
That's funny. Somebody else asked me this at one point, and I don't have a bucket list. There are people who I wished I had worked with some time ago, from a fandom point of view. For instance, I was always a huge Sting fan. Always. Do I wish to be on a session with him? No. I mean, sorry, I don't don't wish. I would like to be on a session with him, but it's not on my bucket list that it has to happen, or like, it's fine if it happens or it doesn't happen. Having done this for 2 decades now, a lot of people came and went through my life, and a lot of musical experiences that I had came from very unexpected places. There were bands that you will never hear of that made me cry in the control room because they had just the most beautiful song, you know. And there were other ones where you go like, you know, I should be happy to be in this room, but I'm not feeling it. You know, and that's just being a human. I think, you know, as a fanboy, there are many people. I would like to work with Eminem theoretically. I love his music. I don't know if I would enjoy the session. It could be the coolest thing ever, or like, yeah, all right, I don't know. so I don't have the bucket list. I really don't. I look for great music that touches me first, because that is how I experience it. That hopefully touches many people, but that's a little bit out of my hand, because you can only make the best music. But then if it becomes a hit, if it becomes something that everybody will listen to, is a little bit, it's up to not to chance, but at least not up to me directly. So I hope that they work out.
And in terms of what were the kind of coolest techniques or tricks or things that you picked up along the way from people that, you know, you would hope to pass on to a new generation of engineers?
The coolest tricks. It's a funny thing. Actually, I'm going to think about that for a second, and I'm going to answer it with a little drier thing. I know this is being talked about online a lot, but I hope that people coming up are recognizing the craft and the way the instruments being DAWs, etc., are being designed, and the workflows that are being designed, how they are meant to work. I hope that people realize that there's sense in that, and that goes all the way down to, for instance, one of the hot button topics is gain staging right now. You know, gain staging and unity gain, for instance, are things that are very, very dear to my heart, where I'm going like, you know, if you have a clean working style, clean technique, I think you can develop your personal taste, the thing that you can actually sell, because nobody cares. Nobody that wants to hire you cares about gain staging, right? Mm-hmm. But if you have good technique and the foundation to stand on, your creative endeavors and experiments work out better and can be more flexible. So what I'm trying to say, what I really don't like is this whole thing, oh, I just push buttons until it sounds good. I'm like, no. I mean, I hope that you're right. I hope that you push buttons until it sounds good. But how smart would it be to actually know all the buttons and know why you push them and get better at it? Same thing with producers who say, I don't need to learn music theory. Or so I'm like, maybe you're right. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying, wouldn't it be, if this is your life's endeavor, wouldn't you want to learn all of that stuff? Wouldn't you want to base your knowledge and technique on things that people designed for you on the music side, literally for hundreds of years? I don't know. It sounds like a great idea to me. To me, always be a student. Learn something new. Never think that you know it all, because you don't. And you know, like, so for instance, when I walked into a studio with Prince, I already was an engineer for 10 years. 10 years plus 5 years learning in schools. Why 5 years? Because I actually went to school twice for this, right? But so I knew what I was doing, but every day I was presented with not so much problems, but situations that require new thinking. And so that's what needs to happen. Very often I try to inspire myself too. I'm like, if I was a kid today, I'm like 18, 19 years old, and I want to be a music anything, insert anything here. How would I do it, and what would I do, right? Like, for instance, there is no point. Some people will disagree, but I don't think there's any point in learning, for instance, about analog tape machine. It's in 2021. Like it's cool to know. Thank you. You should be interested in it. Like I just said, it would be interesting to know. But you will probably, most likely, not see an analog tape machine in your entire life anymore. It's just not that important anymore. And music is not made that way anymore. The last time I used one was 2010, I think. Yeah, something like that. So that being said, music is being made in Ableton and Logic and Pro Tools, etc. People even say like, oh, most things have to be mixed in Pro Tools, etc. But I'm like, that's not true. Hit records have been mixed in Ableton all the time recently, and probably Logic too. So I'm trying to think like, what would that kid do? Can I be that kid? Do I need? You see all the stuff here in my studio. Do I need that, or can it become something that's part of my computer? And it's not just that it's better or worse, or trying to keep up with old vintage times, or is it just it's 2021 and we make music mostly in computers, and that's okay, and that's the way you should do it. That's how you should embrace it. That's the way forward. And I try to be that person at all times. That is important to me.
So yeah, that's really interesting, and that kind of, to a large degree, mirrors my feelings. I've taught music production in a lot of places, and those foundational things like allow you to get to a place where the artist is happier quicker. Why wouldn't you want to take that route? When you've got an artist there and they need something then and there that maybe you didn't expect or couldn't anticipate, being able to have that table of contents in your mind of what are the different routes I could take and weigh up those things without having to spend 20 minutes twiddling, that becomes a huge advantage. So yeah, I'm in agreement with you on that. So I just want to pivot onto where you went from engineering to then primarily doing mostly mixing. How did that come about?
That's the interesting part, because like you probably know, most things happen a little bit by accident. I did for like, I don't know, let's say 5 to 7 years. I thought like the best way to do everything would be just to be an engineer and then make the best rough mix, and then somebody will say that rough mix is so great, or even better, you do the rough mix and then somebody else mixes it, but it can't be the rough mix. That this whole game, right? This is all in our mind that's probably the way to do it. And I'm convinced that happened more often in the 80s and 90s. And starting in the 2000s, it started to become a little different, where there was a lot of brand recognition, as in like, this record has to be mixed by so and so, and this record has to be mixed by so and so. So I feel that a lot of times the cards are stacked so far against you. Like, even if you had made the best mix, you're still not gonna get the gig. And I actually have been on gigs where literally they said, well, yes, I like yours better, but you know how it is.
Yeah,
and I'm like,
I've had exactly that conversation myself. So yeah.
And it happened often. I mean, sometimes it was the opposite. Sometimes I got the gig. Okay, but that doesn't necessarily lead to a steady enough work. You can't have a release from a rough mix, every 4 months and then call yourself a mixer. I'm sorry, you can't call yourself a mixer. I don't want to put anybody down. But I'm just like, then you're still mostly engineering. You had some mixing credits, and that's great. But that's not a full-time mixer. That's a tough one. And so what I learned over time is you have to decide it for yourself, in a way. Like, I had to literally build. I mean, this is probably my 7th studio. This is called Mix House, because I'm German. House. I had to build that studio and say, listen, I'm probably only gonna mix from now on. And there's a couple of people I still record for because A, we've been doing it for 20 years, and B, it's fun, and C, they pay me well. But I'm not chasing another recording gig currently, So at one point you have to put that energy out there and saying, instead of saying like, I hope somebody's playing the game that I'm playing in my head, which is, if I just make the best mix, I'm gonna be a mixer tomorrow, and everybody's gonna love me, and I'm gonna make millions of dollars, which is not true, I think. Plus, nobody knows that that's going on in your head, so they're not playing your game. That's not even their fault. You know, it's like you go into a hairdresser, and the hairdresser is assuming that you want to make them be Paul Mitchell or like some super famous hairdresser, which is not true. You just want to get a haircut, right? So the game is in your head, and you're trying to make it happen for yourself. Nobody else cares. They're not in the business of making you famous as a mix engineer, or even employed. Their job is to make music, and hopefully you did a good job being part of that. So at one point I felt like I had to make that jump myself. The last big gig that I engineered was the Prince record, and that was already in a time where it's like, I think I have to go to mixing only, but you don't turn down Prince. Sorry, you just don't. Plus I got to mix that too, so whatever. That was the point too. But then after that I was like, now we have some good credits around, we should focus on this. And by focusing, it became the truth. Does that make sense? Like by saying I'm a mixer now, all of a sudden mix work appeared. Like you attracted it. I'm not into that I'm not into that whole attraction game, but it is true that I basically in my efforts filtered out the things I didn't want to do and materialized more of the things that I wanted to do. Now, does that mean I was immediately successful at it? No, of course not. It was a mixture of bigger records and smaller records, and budgets that you go like, seriously, you want that's okay. I guess we're doing that. And then you basically, that was 10 years ago. So I'm. Have been busy mixing ever since from then. But it took that moment. You go like, what do you want to do, sir? And then just do that. Go do that, and it'll work out.
And what is it about mixing that makes you feel like it's a good match for you and your personality?
There's a couple of things. The biggest thing is the combination of technology and music. Like, I still want to be a pianist without having to make my living of being a pianist. I want to make records. I'm interested in the puzzle of making music work. I'm interested in records itself, like the mystical beast of a record. What makes a good record? Why does this work? Surprise yourself all day long, going like, this vocal is really loud, but now it works, and you learn something every time. It's my personal Sudoku, the hill I die on. It's kind of like, it's my sport. It's like the thing that you want to get better at, and you feel that you have a chance at getting better at. Like I said earlier with the piano thing, if you're only being told the entire time, you can't do this, you're not good at this, you're not getting high. I mean, at one point, that's not going to work out for you, because either you start believing it or you're going to run out of money and time. But if you actually have the feedback that, hey, I love what you did with my song, you really elevated this and that, I can't even believe, I don't even know what you did, blah, blah, blah. And of course that happens combined with, I didn't like that mix, cool, that's part of the deal too. All of a sudden you have a fight you can win, and that gives you incredible amount of stamina and power, and going like, every morning I'm going to do that today. And that is basically the best version of music to me at this moment.
And what are these, how do you go about finding the magic in a song? How do you find that performance to bring out, or that way to, make what was probably in a lot of cases already quite a good rough mix, a step further? Like, how do you go about finding that magic?
That's a very good question, because that is actually, at this point in technology in 2021, I think that's the job description. Everybody has the tools. Actually, I can't even say that I have tools that you don't have. Sure, I have some very sweet analog equipment, but I can also not say that you definitely need that to make a record. So most of the time I get rough mixes that are actually, they're very good. They're very good because people learn more, they can practice. You used to have to have a major studio to make any good sounding record, and also you would have to have that downtime to practice. Now you open your computer and you can practice. By the way, everybody should practice. Just because just because you think it's engineering or mixing or production or whatever, it doesn't mean you should not practice like you're a musician on it. But what I feel often is this: the musical idea of a rough mix is always right, because the record wouldn't have made it to me if not most people involved in the record think, hey, we got something here. Because I'm pretty expensive, the next guy is pretty expensive, and also the people I think we're almost there. We're like 10, 15% away from the final. Let's send it to somebody who can finish it. Which means the musical idea is there. And what I also say is that producers and musicians alike, of course, and many engineers, hopefully, are really good at blends and musical ideas. So everybody can say, hey, that vocal is too loud, that blend is too whatever, the middle part is too loud or too soft. That's not hard, that's something that's actually very basic musical knowledge in that way, right? So all their rough mixes sound good on a musical level. Now, to me, most of them sound like this, though. I'm saying like it's compact, it makes sense, it's the entire record is represented, but it is not the best it could be yet. My job is to go from here to here. Like blow up this idea of the rough mix. Say everything that's good about the rough mix, we keep all of that. And then expand the sonic space, but also in that way find the emotion of the record, which most often is in the vocal, sometimes in the groove, of course. But we're trying to instead of having all the faders down and then building a new mix and impressing your client with, which I don't think happens that often anyway, is start where they were, blow it up. Okay, this could be wider, this could be more balanced, less balanced, depending on, less balance is also a good emotion depending on the music. But something that takes that thing and doesn't make it this or this, which would be a totally different idea, which normally gets rejected because people that think they have a hit song on their hand don't want that hit song to change all that much. Especially not a week before mastering or something like that. So this and this will probably not fly, or maybe once or twice in 10 songs when you have a real good point. But very often taking the decisions that everybody has made and improving upon them and presenting them in their best light seems to be the better way in 2021.
And interestingly, to take that point a step further, how do you ask for multi-tracks now? Do you like having the session how they left it, or do you like having a blank slate? Because obviously if you spend a lot of your time just getting it back to where they started, how do you stand on that?
Actually, I mean, I have a very, very detailed prep document, but on the very bottom is, if you work in Pro Tools, just send me that. Right? Mm-hmm. I want the last version of whatever you have. I have almost every plugin we know, and if something runs out, we're ask back, can you print this one thing? That's the easiest. And then I can see what you were doing. I can see what you tried to do, where I'm like, oh, I see what you're doing here. I can do it better, but that was a good idea, etc. If it's a different DAW, the funny part is I can actually open almost anything. I have all the major DAWs, but that introduces a layer of it could not be exactly right, and then that's a problem. So I have people normally print me stems, dry and wet stems, and some stuff raw, normally live drums and strings and some vocals. But here's the thing, let's say you and I know people record, for instance, with their Apollo, right? They don't even have a mic pre anymore, which is totally fine. Make the record you want to make. There is a raw file, I get it. It's something that is probably pretty untouched. But on the other hand, since the recording moment, no one has heard it any differently than whatever you put on there. So the raw file is almost useless, like because you already compressed it, you already EQ'd it, etc. Blah blah blah, and nobody, like the artist, the producer, the manager, nobody has heard it any other way. So what is the point to going back to raw? Now you have something that is, now you're like backtracking many ways. Now I could say, what if the guy totally destroyed it? I'm like, sure, but then how did the song make it this far?
Yeah,
You know,
and every decision was based on compounding all of those little decisions, that tones were decided on other tones, and if you take all of that away, you're, in my opinion anyway, you're just creating more work for yourself.
it's not only more work, but it's also a very high likeliness that they get back at you with like, I mean, I think it's good. I see what you're doing, but it's just not what it was. And the whole thing, like getting notes that basically pile up to more like the rough mix.
Yeah.
It happens all the time for everyone, you know. So I'm just like, I want to start at your rough mix, because people also are actually pretty good at recording these days. I mean, there's stuff that I don't agree with, but it's not destroyed most of the time. I don't get many files where I'm like going like, what happened here? You know, so most of the time I just deal with that. I'm like, okay, maybe a little bit more compressed than I thought it should be. I'll just work with it. Sometimes I ask back for one thing, but you know, like even the whole thing, like I don't want to EQ you in a corner or something like that. I'm like, you know, the knob goes the other way too. If it's too bright, I make it darker. And like, it's not that big of a deal. And what people need to also realize, in the olden days, every instrument, like let's say you record a vocal, right? There was probably a Neve 1073 with some EQ on the way in. It probably went into Pro Tools. Somebody EQ'd it there. Somebody EQ'd it on a sub. Then they EQ'd it on the master, and then it was again EQ'd in mastering. So every signal, doesn't matter how you look at it, will probably get EQ'd 5 times. You know, like, so why? I don't see how you can possibly, break it so far that I cannot fix it anymore. So it has worked better this way to me. Like, you know, I want stems that sound like your rough mix, and I'll take it from there, and that works most of the time. And then, you know, in the end, if something doesn't work, you just ask back. People are totally fine with that normally.
And obviously, looking at your website and what you're doing, you've also made some master classes about mixing. I'm just wondering, what have you had any time to get feedback from people that have done these master classes and seen some of the kind of mistakes that people are making that, you know, you think that you can help people out of, and what would those be, and how would you help get them out of those situations?
Well, thanks for mentioning that. Yeah, the master class. I have a couple. What I wanted to combine to what we asked in the earlier questions, like, you know, I wanted to show somebody a really from first files to final mix, kind of like a system that works for me, and that gives me more of a foundational approach in your mixing technique, you know. So that's really what it does. The biggest mistake, not so much after they saw my masterclass, I hope there's not that many mistakes. No, the biggest mistakes to me is that whole, you know, we mix while we go. We have kind of no plan on how we do it. We just kind of like touch everything up at all times and go like, a little bit louder, a little bit softer, a little bit brighter. And then we do it like for 4 days, 5 days, 6 months. That's, I feel that is not mixing. That is kind of like, you're rough mixing, literally, with no intent, except for whatever I'm hearing, I want to make it a little better. I get it, but that's not what I do. I have a day to again make your song from this to that, and you need some kind of approach to it, like and preferably one that doesn't change from song to song, and that starts at monitoring levels, body impact levels. That it goes through what I said, gain staging, but it also goes through a little bit of like a comfort zone of like, do you start with vocals or do you start with guitars or drums? I know some people go like, well, I find the most important part to start with and go from there. And I agree with that theoretically, but I just don't do that. It's like, the most important part most of the time is the vocal, but I still have to make the drums sound like they're awesome. So to me, I don't do that. There's specific things that happen in our engineering path that always happen, like make the drums more impactful, yet wide, yet fitting into the dynamic range that's allowed. There's a lot of technology that happens to make an emotional impact, but they always happen. Like you always compress vocals. Sorry, I'm not saying you should or whatever. Al Schmidt would disagree with me. I get it, but if you look at songs, most of the times you compress and EQ and reverb. Like there's specific steps you take every time. So in order to do that, you have to identify these steps and make them as easy for you, as repetitive as you can. And I'm not saying that's templates, because I actually have an issue with templates, because they make you think that everything is the same. But there are templates, for instance, that are just routing, that have processes in place, like they have tools in place that make you do your thing faster, but not necessarily make a specific sound on it yet. So that's what it is. Like, create the music that is on the plate, not try to put something on top of the music that you're trying to create and hope it magically works out, because it won't.
Yeah, I mean, an analogy that I often make is, how a big tech guy like Steve Jobs or Mark Zuckerberg would strip down their appearance to the same thing every day, because you have every decision you could possibly make, millions of decisions. I want to concentrate my decisions on the things that matter. And again, having a consistency in your approach and the way you do things, down to color coding, routing, all of that sort of stuff, how loud you monitor, what monitoring you're using. If you can get really used to all of that, it frees up your mind to concentrate on what are the big wins, I guess, is a way that I like to think about it. Are there any other kind of pearls of wisdom like that you like to tell students?
I would say, one of the more important things, because everybody asks me what is your favorite this and that, which there are answers to that, but my most important answer to everybody is your monitoring has to be great. That's where we spend our money first, because otherwise you can't hear all the details of what you're trying to achieve. But apart from that, it's great, which means, by the way, not necessarily the most expensive whatever, but the best monitoring that fits your space is the best in my book. But what I'm trying to tell people is we are trying to make a physical connection to the music with the monitoring. Yes, you can listen soft for balances. You can listen very loud. You go if you feel it or whatever. But I feel that every person has a level that's a little bit personal. That I call the body impact level. That's I should probably trademark that, and if nobody said that before, I don't know. I think it makes a lot of sense. There is a level in your speaker system where if your record is at the right level, at a normal level, whatever that is, it gives you a specific impact. For instance, the kick drum hits you in the chest, or the snare drum kind of sounds just so a little bit too loud, just a little bit too snappy. Much like if you actually stood next to a drum kit and somebody hit the snare drum, that's not soft. That's really hurtful, So actually the recording of that sound should, it should not hurt you, but it should be not polite either, It should be something like that. And if you have a level, and I have it very much on one, this is an Avocet, you can set the levels by 1 dB. I know exactly where that level is. I actually most of the time don't move it at all. And I mix the record into this particular level, because it's very easy for me then to go okay, push up the fader for the kick drum at a level that I know looks good, but also feels good. And if it doesn't feel good, then I know something is wrong with the sound. It's not just I wish it had more bottom, or I wish it was a little bit brighter or punchier. You just know, hey, this record this kick drum doesn't do the thing to my chest. Why it doesn't do the thing to my? It should at this level, not because it's too loud, but because it's exactly at the level at which it should do that. and you tweak you tweak level, compression, EQ, etc., until it gives you that feeling. But you can't have that feeling if you listen on a phone or even on an ART or on a small speaker, because it's not designed for that. But there is a system with or without subwoofers, depends on your preference, that gives you that feeling. And the cool part is it's almost like aligning your ears to your system, because I know this record will do this at this specific level, but it also means if I push, like, let's say I push a vocal to a specific level and solo it, right? Theoretically, if my listening environment was not aligned like this, that vocal could be loud or soft. I would never know because it's playing by itself, right? But in a system that I'm describing, where you have a foreseeable level, you kind of actually know. You push up the fader and you just hear, that's loud, that's soft, this is too loud, even if there's no other instrument playing, because you know how much sound pressure level is coming at you. I think that is a super important place to find in your studio, because once you have that, you can react to the mixing very naturally, like a musician, like you're in a rehearsal room and you tell to the drummer, hey, you're playing too loud, because he's playing too loud, not because he's playing soft but the PA is loud or something like that. Same thing with your system. He's being perceived loud in your speakers because it's actually too loud for the record. And having this aligned system to me is super helpful. And I want to say one thing that has super changed things and made it easier for engineers over the last 20 years is it used to be that you actually had to go to a big room, and that might not be your room, which means it's not always your room, which means the studio itself used to be a variable. You had to like go to different cities and mix, or at least different rooms in town, and every room would be different. Now what we have is we can actually create with home studios. This is a very good one. It's actually not even a home studio. It's a commercial facility. But with our own studios, we can tweak our system to our personal preferences so much that things become easier and more repeatable. That is an advantage that we just didn't have, you know.
And how do you go about finding a speaker that kind of fits for you? You know, that's something that I've heard many people ask about. It's like, well, how do I know when a speaker is right? Do you have any advice there?
That's such an important question that's so hard to answer. So you see the speakers I have behind me. I have the Proax. And the reason I have them is because I had them for 20 years. I like them. I never liked NS10s. I have a pair. They're literally on the shelf. I never turn them on. I hate them with a vengeance. I just don't feel they sound like music. And I also feel that whole thing, like if you can make stuff sound good on them, then it sounds everywhere. I think that's untrue now. Maybe at one point it was true, but I just am disappointed listening to them. So anyway... But the answer, for instance, then you see the Focal, these are twin 6Bs. In my case, they're actually tuned and have two subwoofers on them. It's called the Caltats Phantom Focus System, which is, it's a tuning standard. It's not just the speaker. So basically, if I could tell you that the speaker itself, you could buy the same speaker, but it doesn't sound like mine. And I'm not saying that it's better. Mine sound great in this room, down to 20 hertz, super flat, super awesome. But it took me a while. I actually had Adam speakers and Barefoots in this room, and they just didn't sound right. And I'm not blaming the speakers. I'm blaming the connection of the speakers to the room. So the answer is, like, if somebody asks me, like, hey, what speakers do you recommend? My first answer is, I can't. I can tell you which speakers I like, which are Proax, but they might suck in your room. And actually, these Proax don't sound their best in this room. They're a little bit bottom light, and those are not tweaked. So basically, the answer is you have to find 5 or 6 different speakers of good quality. You know, you have to try them in your room and move them around a little bit until until you find the best spot in your room, and then decide kind of very scientifically. So which ones sound best in this room? There is no real preference, because I can guarantee that every speaker is designed pretty well to their specifications, but none of them sound good in every room. So when I had to take the Barefoots out of here, I was like, I'm sorry, they just didn't work here, even though in another room that I had before, they sounded really, really great. That's really the answer. And so these speakers have not changed for 11 years now.
Oh, wow. Yeah, so I have a set of Twin Bees as well, and again I moved studio 3 or 4 years ago, and they went from sounding the best speaker that I'd ever owned in one studio to actually me spending ages trying to move them around and never ever actually got them where I wanted them. So I've got some personal experience that kind of matches exactly what you're saying. And so you would recommend to people that they literally hire or borrow a bunch of speakers, get them in the space, and actually just spend some time with them all?
I would literally call the dealer and say, listen, I'm gonna make you a deal. I'm definitely gonna buy one pair of speakers from you, but you need to give me 5, and you need to give me a week, and then I'll bring 4 of them back. And a good dealer does that. That's the only way to do it. I wish I had an easier answer. And I know if I have to move out of the studio, which I hope I don't, because I've been here for a very long time, I am prepared that I will have to change speakers, because I just don't know if these are going to work in the next room.
As you were kind of going through this process, who were your kind of biggest mentors or idols as you went through this process of learning?
It was crazy. I mean, it started from mentors at Berkeley, the ones I mentioned before, Rob Jasko, Carl Beatty. Those were like people that can shape you, because you can actually ask them questions while you're learning your style, because that's their job. They're teachers, right? So it starts there. Then in New York, there were people on the hip hop side that were really impressive to me, like Young Guru was there already with Jay-Z, of course. But then obviously the bigger mixers around the time, Michael Brower, Chris Lloyd-Alge, Tony Maserati, of course. Dave Pensado I had just gotten to know about him when I was in New York, but then actually he became a friend when I moved over to Los Angeles, and he's obviously a master. It's funny. It was many different mixers for different reasons, for different styles, like Andy Wallace for the harder style, Bob Clearmountain at the time as well. Pat Viala was a great hip hop mix at the time. Then later I was lucky enough to do some of the mix with the master programs with Chad Blake and actually Michael Brower at the time too, and Chris Lloyd-Alge. Because the funny part was this: I did mix with the masters after my Prince record. It was not because like I don't know how to make a record. Because I mean, I was 12 years into the game. I was like, but the fanboy in me, and the person who wants to go, like, not only do I want to make a good record, but I also want to make it faster. So as in, I want to learn new techniques. Said like in 2011, I wanted to hang with Michael Brower. So that's what I'm saying. You have to keep being a student. You have to keep looking up to people who work at the top of their game at all times. And I hope to be that person for someone. And this is why I give my master classes. I have done them here in America, but also in Germany and also in China, because I happen to have a lot of C-pop clients over there. And it's a give and take, a never-ending cycle. At this moment, I am both the student and the master in that way. I have things to show and I have things to learn, and I love that about this music approach.
Yeah, how very Star Wars Jedi of you right there.
There's a lot of Star Wars in my mind, in my life. I'm not gonna move the camera now, but there's probably too much in this studio. It is true, but it's you can never be at that point where you go you just know everything, because there when Skrillex came out and you go like, I've never heard music like this. How is this guy doing this? And he's like, he doesn't even have a keyboard. He just does it on his laptop, and it's impressive. And I want to know how you do that. It would be arrogance to feel like I know how to make records better than you do. No, I know how to make records different than you do. And if you like what I do, then it's smart for you to ask me a question. And if I like what you do, it's smart for me to ask you a question. That's really the basic of it all.
Yeah, and so if we go from mentors and idols to actually, what are your desert island mixing tools? What are the things that you feel like, get you from A to B quicker, or the things that you just keep turning back to?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, at this point, there's a lot of Brainworks in my life, a lot of Fab Filter. What I always need is one very clean EQ, which right now is the Fab Filter Q3, and also the Metric Halo channel strip. And one that is kind of more old school, and at this point that would be Brainworks SSL 4000 EQ, like that. But actually, when I said this, from this to this, a lot of what makes me go from here to here is actually spaciousness, spatial processors, to make that very, very easy. That's choruses, that is reverbs, like we're talking about. That is very. The tools themselves are similar for all of us. So I'm very, very interested in ambiences and reverbs, and also B, tools that you can't have in the analog domain. And I'm going to mention maybe sound radix, drum levelers, auto align, but maybe also Oak Sound, Soothe, or Gullfoss EQs, etc. Like these kind of things that you go like, they're doing something that is so different from what the analog domain can do, and help you in so many different ways, that you have this layer of technicality and creativity that you can now solve. And then you can apply your things like your SSL EQ, your 480L reverb on something that is not possible in the analog domain by itself. So all of a sudden we have the best of both worlds, like a new approach with a vintage/modeled approach.
So that brings us nicely onto, where do you see technology moving in terms of mixing processes? Do you have an idea of where you would like to see it go?
I start in two ways. One is I wish my DAW would understand me more. Like little, you do routing, etc., in all kinds of DAWs, and basically you feel like, does this program actually know what I'm trying to do, or does it just send audio to the left and to the right and somewhere because I told it to? So I hope that we will get smarter audio where you can literally say, okay, I want the vocal more like Bob Clay Mountain. I want it more like Manny American. And it would just do that for us. And sure, some plugins do that, as in their signature plugins. I get it. But I would like to see that. So on that level, I want the software to be smarter. I want more tools like Gullfoss and Oak Sound, who I know is just dynamic EQ in general, but it is something that is more like, okay, I want something more clean. Boom, there it is. I want something less harsh. Boom, there it is. These are kind of the things that I think will happen. And then on top of that, of course, we have immersive audio, and I mix in surround too for film scores, etc. So the next thing will be obviously an Atmos thing, and whatever might be coming after Atmos, but a more immersive experience.
I guess some of the more cynical people might say that these sort of innovations will kind of remove some of the engineering from the craft. Where do you stand on that? Where is there a line that you cross and you go, well, it's gone artificial intelligence has gone too far? Where do you stand on that?
Well, no. I mean, here's the funny part. I am an engineer, but I come from a musical background, right? Just because I am an engineer doesn't mean I love the act of engineering or the fact that you have to do it. You know, I call myself a record maker. I'm a failed musician, but a successful record maker. And I want to make records however they can be made. I mean, you can say that at all times. Like, for instance, you know, people say Pro Tools will destroy everything because now you can do this and that. And I'm like, true, you're not wrong. At the other hand, you know, Frank Sinatra recorded live to 2-track, or actually 3-track, with an orchestra, and they didn't change anything. And then, you know, the Beatles recorded on 16 tracks, 4 and then maybe 8 tracks. Were they cheating? Do we care? like you know, like you can go back all the time. It's always the question is always this. There's always a compromise between what's good and what's convenient. So you can make better convenience out of multi-track recording, but you cannot make it sound purer than a live to 2. You know, so that's always, it has, through the entire time, it has been this kind of trajectory, and so that's not new. So when somebody says, well, we invent a 1073 EQ, preamp with EQ, we're solving the problem of, I want this specific high end. Well, why can't that specific high end be automatic? And you could just say less or more. How is that different than moving a knob? You know, I think that's much more exciting. And actually, the one thing that's really odd in the music space is, in some kind of way, the best record you can make is with gear from the 1950s and a computer from 2020, which is kind of nuts because, you know, like, meanwhile, James Cameron films Avatar. He's not going to do that on 35 millimeter film because somebody says that's the way to do it. That would stop him. So I want to be that person who sees, wow, that's cool. Now we can do this. That's amazing. Now we can have unlimited tracks. And yes, we have the right to make really shitty music with that. We also have the right to make really great music with that. So why don't we try to do the best we can?
So, moving on to how you were talking about the... a lot of what you do is about creating the depth and the width to mixes. How do you go about that? And specifically in terms of spatial effects, reverb and delay, are you having 3 or 4 instances and you feed lots of instruments into it? Or are you very much a per subgroup of instruments type of guy? Where do you stand?
I share reverbs. There's probably in my template, and again, my template meaning the way I have stuff hooked up. There's probably 15 of them, different ones. And to me, they're very specific colors, very short ambiances. There's like 3 or 4 different short ambiances. Then there's medium plates most of the time. I'm always a fan of plates. They seem to be less intrusive in the lower mid-range to me. So less cluttery, less... They seem to be like, okay, here's the reverb and the space that I want to create, but it doesn't cover up all the rest of that. I do not tweak verbs very often from those food groups. I basically go so far that I do have PCM 70. I have 2 of those. I have a couple of SPX 990s, like hardware reverbs. And for years, they were just sitting on one program. They were sitting on one program in my rack, and I never touched them. I just decided, okay, this is the kind of splash we need for this song, and this is what it's not. This is easier on the ambiances because they're short anyway. They're like whatever, a half a second long, maybe 0.8 or so. It gets a little bit more complicated with the longer, like 1.72 second kind of reverb, because that could actually change with the song. I get it, you know. But they were staples in my setup, and basically now over time I have moved almost all of them. No, actually I've moved all of them into the computer. Some with convolution and some with plugins that are now available. And the funny part is basically like I take these ambiances and I decide what the single instrument needs to do and where it needs to be placed forward and backward. But because of the sharing, it still sounds natural. It doesn't sound like every part just has a random reverb on it, because that doesn't gel. So it's kind of a little bit of both. I do not, though, like for instance, route everything to one sub and then send reverb from there. That would be very, very unlikely.
Brilliant. And in terms of your kind of Hall of Fame reverbs, and this can be both hardware and software, what are the kind of golden units for you, things that you love and keep coming back to?
I mean, I don't have to be subtle about it. That it's right there. That's the 480L. That has been my staple. I mean, I've had this particular unit for 15 years now, but obviously because they discontinued it in early 90s, I believe. That particular unit is 30 years old. Is it about 40 years old? Oh my.
Yeah, it came out in 1986, so 35th anniversary this year. Yeah.
Yeah, we're coming up. The funny part with the Lexicon, and that Lexicon sound is not just that. Like I said, I have 3 of the PCM 70s who are really, really great reverbs too. There is some transparency to it and something that hugs an instrument in a way that doesn't just clutter everything. I want to say it like this. What reverbs are, by definition, they're just a bunch of very, very, very fast delays that are hopefully programmed to somehow simulate a room and a reflection that comes back from a wall that we obviously don't have because it's fake. But there are many reverbs that they sound like it's a bunch of delays that are now all over your sound space. And if you really look at it like a window, for instance, right? It almost sounds like the whole thing is now tinted. It's less transparent. The canvas you're writing on is full with flutter stuff. Sorry, I'm very actually I feel very emotional about these things because over the years there were almost no plugins that could make reverb as well as the 480L and the PCM 70s, where I literally was saying like, I'm trying to replace these two. I know these will die at one point because they're very old. I need a replacement, plus it would be faster to do it in the computer. And I would say until your 480L showed up, I had no solution. I compared every version of a 480L or something that's similar to my reverb. Is like, can I lose this? And I'm like, I don't want to lose this. And that's part of the reason why it's still here, because I still use it from time to time. But there was a huge qualitative difference from the plugins to these reverbs. And the funny part was this: I had a Bricusti here at one point, which is a fantastic reverb. And I not shut it out. I was considering buying it, and I didn't buy it. And I tell you why. Because I totally saw why everybody loved it so much, which is it was miles ahead of any plugin reverb you could ever find. I totally get it. So people are like, I need the Bricusti, it's just so great. But versus these Lexicon reverbs, there was not much of a difference. When I say, of course they sound different, but like quality-wise, I'm like, oh, is this because most people have forgotten how great a hardware reverb can sound? Is this why? And so I decided not to buy it, even though I think it's a really great unit. It's almost like if I had none of my reverbs, I would maybe have bought a Bricusti at the time. But there was a huge difference, and I was an apostle about it. I told people, like, you gotta check out some hardware reverb because it's just not there. And now, 2018, 2019, 2020, we're starting to get into this place where I'm like, okay, I think we have arrived at where that is. The emulation that you made is so close to the real thing that I have absolutely no reservation in using it.
Brilliant. And I think that kind of wraps up what I've got here to ask you. So I guess just some final parting advice about what you would say if you were starting out all over again. What advice would you give back to yourself?
One thing that I did right, I think, which is I tell people wherever you're coming from, especially as an engineer. Now, if you're a producer, that's a different story. If you're a producer, you should just go in your bedroom, make music, and then there's many different paths for you that I don't want to advise you about. But if you're a mixer or or you want to be an engineer, whenever you made that decision, like this is what I want to do, find the biggest studio you can find that does the music that you're interested in. That's super important. And of course, try to make them hire you. Because here's the thing. If you love Beyonce's music, she's not gonna appear in your bedroom. It doesn't matter how good of a mixer you are. It's just not gonna happen, or if it's gonna happen, then maybe 12 years from now, I don't know, and I don't know why, but probably not. So my idea is like what happened to me, expose yourself to the possibility of Jay-Z walking in and get to work with him. And be ready for the gig, of course. And why do I say you need to find the biggest and most expensive studio? Is because the people that you really, 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 really want to work with, they will book that room. You know, the Beatles went to Abbey Road, and whatever. Rihanna went to Chalice Studio in Los Angeles, whatever. That's where the people that you're looking up to will book a room, and that's where you possibly have contact with them. That's a good place to start a career, if nowhere else. In your bedroom is gonna be a very hard time for a very long time. So exposure is important. And then the other thing, the thing that I probably did wrong, like I said earlier, you know, when I came from Berkeley, I was like, oh, you know, I'm gonna get exactly what I want because I am a hotshot student, which I was. But obviously that didn't work out that way, and that's totally fine in hindsight. But just know that the opportunity that you need, or you don't know you need yet, or that you want, is not going to appear at the moment that you want it. It's just very, very unlikely that that's happening. So which means that if that opportunity happens 4 years later, 5 years later, and you feel that you don't want to take it because you're now too advanced, for instance, which is something that happened to me. An assistant gig opened up possibly that in hindsight I should have probably taken, you know, because there would have been a lot to learn. But I felt I was too far in my career to go back. I feel in hindsight that was a mistake. Now everything worked out fine. I'm cool. But I'm just trying to say, like, keep that in mind. Actually, to this day, I could get a call today for an opportunity that I feel that is not for me because I am maybe too far advanced on my path. And I will this time consider that much, much harder. But that opportunity will not, the one that you're looking for will not materialize at the moment that you're looking for it. It's impossible.
Well, I actually have some first-hand experience of that very thing. Is I did a lot of live sound and studio work together at first, did a load of tours and had gathered a fair amount of experience. And in the end, I decided, well, making records in the studio is what I want to do. So I moved down to London, and it was very difficult, even with a fair amount of experience, to get anyone to give me a chance. And I just thought, you know what, I'll just start running again in the biggest studio, you know, and the biggest studios in London. I ended up training at Metropolis Studios. I don't know if you know it, but yeah, going there, starting from the very bottom again, you know, a humbling experience, but a very worthwhile one. And I was lucky in a similar way to you that within a few months I was kind of assisting from running. But I would echo those sentiments that you really, you know, when something's right and you really want to do it, you know, there's almost not this thing of thinking you're too far ahead for doing that. And I'm, you know, very grateful that I decided to do that because it worked out very well for myself. So
nice. No, congratulations.
Yeah.
It's a weird part. Like sometimes to recognize the opportunity is part of the gig. Like it's not gonna be, you know, wrapped up nicely and handed to you. It's gonna look a little odd, and maybe it's gonna look even a little shitty. You just don't even know.
So
But
recognizing opportunities, then, are there any traits that you've picked up or tips along the way that for people?
unfortunately, I cannot say that. Like I learned so many times the hard way, which is the way it should be, really. Maybe this is the funny part. Maybe I have a pretty good longevity. Like I said, I've been doing this for roughly 20 years now. I feel many of the paths I took over the years have helped with that longevity, even though some of them looked like they were like it didn't turn out well, or it was a bad idea, or whatever. Everything I thought about it at the time turned out to be an important part of my travels in hindsight. So I'm thankful for the ups and downs. That's all fine. Like being here after this long that's the success at all.
Well, that seems like a perfect way to round off the interview. So, yeah, thanks very much, Richard, for joining us. And hopefully you can do a masterclass for us at some point soon.
I would love that. That would be great.